So, Melinda, let's set the stage for this interview. We're jumping to the past on this one, and specifically your past, all the way back as an undergrad. And I know we've had you on the podcast many times as a guest, as a host, and you've talked about your background in advising, but this not quite like this. We're actually kind of peeling back the onion on this episode with your background in higher ed. So, take us back to Melinda as a first gen student, as an undergrad.
Sure. Thank you. And Matt, again, it is always so wonderful to see you and the work that you continue to do to share this energy and the stories and the passion that our advisors have for their field. And so I just always want to thank you every time I see you to say, this is awesome. People are really loving the podcast. And I celebrate you every time I see something on LinkedIn or Facebook about this. But yes, you're absolutely right. Oftentimes I do talk a little bit about the fact that I was a first generation student and coming into Virginia Commonwealth University as an undergrad was a lot. I considered myself to not really understand, right, when we talk about that hidden curriculum. So my brother and my sister also went to school, but that's nothing like when you go and have to walk this path and understanding, the ins and outs and everything like that. And I came in majoring in mass communications, and like every student, you go through and wonder, is this for you? Is this where I'm supposed to be? Especially as you start taking a lot of other classes for general education and just understanding who you are as a student at the collegiate level. So it was a lot to navigate and manage, but we are joined today by a special guest. Um, I always knew her as Miss Marbury, and then she got married, so then it was Miss Aroche. So it's just so good to be able to see her. And for all those who are listening, this is my undergraduate academic advisor when I was in undergrad.
Yeah, and before we read Alicia's bio and welcome Alicia to the podcast, was it hard to find your undergrad advisor after all these years?
Actually, it was. The first thing that anybody does is you Google, right? And I was just like, I wonder if she's still at VCU and in what capacity. And so, we had, of course, stayed in touch with each other. And then, as I went into my master's program and then moved into my doctorate, and then you lose touch with people who have always touched your life. And so then I was like, I'm going to Google her. This would be great to be able to talk to her a little bit about, advising. And so then I started with Google, and then it went to LinkedIn, and then it went to Facebook. And I was just like, oh my God, I need to be able to find her. And then finally, a really dear friend of mine, who was actually also a student of Alicia's, was like, I think I have her phone number. And so let's try this. And so then I called her and left a message. And I was just like, I hope she remembers who I am and calls me back. And she did.
And Alicia, when you got the voicemail from Melinda, what went through your mind?
Well, first of all, I'm chuckling as you're recounting how difficult it was to find me because I do try to go incognito sometimes. So I'm impressed with you following up so many times. So when I heard from Melinda, I just immediately said, "Oh my goodness, Melinda!" I was excited. She mentioned that she was back in Virginia, and I wanted to hear more about that. And she said to me, "I hope you remember me." And I thought, Melinda, of course I remember you. so, so it was just really sweet, and I was really excited to be able to catch up with her. It took us a few times. We played phone tag for a bit, but I was really excited to see what she was up to.
Yeah, and I think based off of just based off that comment and Global Advising Week being about celebrating gratitude, I think this is the perfect interview for this. And so let's make it formal, and let me go ahead and read your bio because when I was reading it earlier before for this, like everything that you have done has been about helping others, and whichever career path it is, it's about assisting the community. And I think this again connects very well with Global Advising Week. So Alicia Aroche has over 25 years of experience across multiple career paths, including community engagement, public health research, racial equity, justice and healing, communications, and storytelling. She currently serves as communications director at the National Healthy Start Association, an organization committed to addressing infant mortality and maternal mortality and morbidity and eliminating racial and ethnic disparities. Early in her career, she served in academia in various roles as administrator, instructor, and advisor to arts and communication students at Virginia Commonwealth University. And after this tenure, Alicia led a community-based participatory research team at the VCU Center on Society and Health as Senior Community Engagement Manager and served as Communications Manager and Community Engagement Advocate as the cross-sector Cradle to Career Collaborative Bridging Richmond. Alicia worked as the Director of Racial Justice and Healing at Initiatives of Change USA, as well as served as the Program Director for the Narrative Change Collaborative. Alicia's filmmaking work has earned awards such as the Best Animated Short Film at the Atlanta Underground Film Festival in 2016 and the DiCarlo Award for the Best Short Documentary in 2021. Alicia holds a Bachelor of Science in Mass Media and a Master's of Education from Virginia Commonwealth University. And since 2018, she has served as an international affiliate with the Concordia University Center on Oral History and Digital Storytelling in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So, Alicia, definitely officially welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. And that's my advisor, y'all.
That is Melinda's advisor. And I know a lot of this interview, we'll be focusing on like your time as an advisor and working with students and specifically working with Melinda. But I thought maybe we could start, Alicia, with finding out more about your work currently as communications director at the National Healthy Start Association and also your work as a filmmaker and producer.
Yeah, as I'm listening to that bio, when you write it, it's one thing, but when you hear other people read it, I'm thinking, wow, I've done all that. So right. Thank you for verbalizing all of that, taking a moment here. So my role at National Healthy Start Association is relatively new. I've been there for 6 months. And so I am the communications director for the entire association. The work that we're doing in the entire association is specifically around infant mortality. There are, cities around the country that have, 5% or more infant mortality rate. And so there are 100 sites around the US that have different services for those communities. So this organization is a support and represents those organizations nationally as well as within the federal space. But then I also work as the communications director for an initiative called AIM-CCI. I'll just say that because the acronym is sometimes really difficult for me to remember some of the prepositions in that. But it is around focusing on addressing the maternal mortality crisis. I don't know if people are aware, but there are disparities, particular racial disparities for particularly Black women, Black and Indigenous women who die three times. Their rate of death during giving birth is 3 times higher than any other racial or ethnic group. And so there is a program that we are working on that's doing multiple things. So one is coming up with educational series. One is around racial equity, for instance, that we just launched. We're also doing something called community-based care bundles. So they're basically evidence-based strategies that people who touch a woman or birthing person at any time in their birthing journey go through to help reduce those, chances of a woman dying. And most of those deaths are preventable. So these bundles are designed to help reduce those deaths. So it's heavy work, right. Heavy work. So the communications role is new. So I'm helping to build a communication strategy right from, the ground up. There hasn't been this role in the association, I believe, for a long while. I know that there has been an element of it, but not, not as comprehensive. We do have a small team. So it's a big job. It's a big job. We're just getting started. I'm just getting started in this role. So yeah, it's an honor to be doing this work. But it's difficult work at times.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But so powerful in terms of its importance to society and in terms of the work that you're doing. And I'm just, it's just wonderful to hear, your commitment and in your heart about, and, your roles, your capacities, in terms of being able to lift up and help and continuing to help and support others.
Yeah, it's definitely, very powerful work that you're doing. And even kind of connected to that is like what you've done in filmmaking too, and producing. And can you talk some more about some of the work that you've done in filmmaking?
Yeah, sure. So that work, so I know you'll get to this question a little bit further in the conversation, but I became my major was communications because I wanted to be a filmmaker. That was my dream and goal at the time. So to be doing it, so many years later is really gratifying. And I think this is the right time for me to be doing that. And so that work was really inspired by the community-based research work I was doing, getting to meet people and hearing their stories and wanting to find ways to bring awareness to some of these issues. Again, a lot of them have been racial justice issues, issues around sexual violence, those kind of things. And I just wanted to create space for that or help create space for that. But also as someone who had a counseling background and spent a big part of my career listening to people, just sitting back and letting people tell their story, which I've always learned and heard is a healing process in itself. So I was able to combine those interests and things that I care about in that work. And I've been really excited and proud at the accomplishments. And as you mentioned in the bio, I got a chance to go to France in October to Cannes and won an award for the short documentary that we did, and then won another award for an animated short that we did. So yeah, so just being able to blend all those interests and transferring those skills, all of that advisor type talk I'm saying right now.
Oh yeah, and you're mentioning like narratives and storytelling, which a lot is what this podcast is about. And then kind of like you're saying, like it's also kind of translates back to being an advisor. And I think maybe that's a great segue. And then we'll be able to kind of connect with Melinda's story. So Alicia, if you can talk about your path, your journey into higher ed, into academia.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate having those questions ahead of time because these are things, of course, I haven't really thought about for some time. And so reflecting on that, the question that I saw was, how did you become an academic advisor? And I'll say, and I don't know if this is common, but it was by accident. It was not something that I aspired to be or choose to be. And Melinda, when you were talking about being a first generation student, I think about one, that being an inspiration for me because of my own challenges, not having an immediate family member who had gone through that process before. And first generation means so much. I reflect on what that meant. And for me, that meant coming from, going through my educational pipeline, being bused from one community to the other, coming from parents who went to segregated schools, and relatively recently in my childhood, learning to navigate this desegregated world, and that was not always easy for them. And so they did the best they could in terms of, working class, middle class family, doing the best we can. So we didn't always have those resources or even those conversations about going to college. And so when I decided to go to college, it was really a decision that I made on my own. It wasn't something that was expected or pushed upon me, or nor were there resources. So being a student and struggling and not finishing school, the traditional 4 years, and starting out with a major that I was clearly not prepared for, which was in the medical field, which is interesting with the work I'm doing. When I finished undergraduate and graduate school, I didn't necessarily feel competitive for what I really wanted to do. So I did have a faculty member that, reached out to me, who felt like, was a great student and did good work. And she was opening a position in the communication school, and she wanted me to apply. And she, wanted me to apply for that. And so that's how I received that job. And so when I started that work, all of that experience for me with those challenges of being a student and navigating all of that, really what I felt on my own. And then not really seeing the structures in place to support students with those kind of stories. When I was, coming through, I wanted to. So when I was in that role and I started to hear those stories, seeing myself and students and hearing those same stories, I had so much compassion, and I wanted to be a champion for each and every student that came to me. And so that's what I set out to do as an advisor.
Yes, you did. And I can attest to that. Just being welcoming and understanding, and not judging when people were lost or confused or concerned. And one of the funniest things that I do remember that I sometimes use in one of my talks is the idea that you have to apply to graduate. But then I also remember talking to you about the grammar test. And I remember I was like, I'm trying to register for 203. And you was like, oh, you have to take the grammar test and you have to take a typing test. And I was like, what? And it was like, oh, it's today at 4:00. So I run downstairs to take the grammar test and to do the typing test. And thank God I passed, because I heard that people would struggle with taking that over and over and over again. And I was able to register for the course. Then you get to the end of the program and you're like, what do you mean I have to apply to graduate? And it was like, oh yeah, you've got to go to the registrar's office and apply to, it's one of those things where thank goodness, that I had you to help navigate and guide that. And one of the biggest things that I often talk about is this idea of majors and careers aren't linear. And you helped me crystallize that in my experiences. And so, what advice would you give to students today when they're thinking about this idea of majors and careers not being linear? Because we're hearing so much about your background and your work that you've done and how it's evolved, and there's core themes that are still throughout your work. So what advice would you give to advisors who are working with students today about this idea of majors and careers not being linear?
Right. Well, as you can see from my bio, I firmly believe that. Yeah, I would say, encourage students to lean into the things that they're interested in, they care about. I can't tell you the number of students that would come in, they'd have a particular major and they'd have a very narrow vision of what that means. And for me, it would just be, I would say to advisors, be curious, ask questions and listen. And so those really exciting moments for me is when I would just be curious and ask questions that may not have really seemed like they mattered to the student. But by the end of the conversation, or two or three, I would, I'd plant seeds and say, I heard you say that you were interested in this. Well, how about, how about you take this and connect it with that? So I really enjoyed helping students connect the dots. So I would say to advisors, help students connect the dots. Don't, necessarily think about a linear path or a traditional path. Just listen to them. And it's kind of like the advice we, I say, or what I say to I have two kids. I say to my kids, I'm not raising you to be a kid. I'm raising you to be an adult. And so as an advisor, I would say, advise them for the long term, not just the immediate graduation, undergraduate period. So that's the advice I would offer.
No, thank you for that. Because that is true. You helped me identify that because of the courses we needed to take in Mass Comm, I was able to get a minor in business. And so just by taking 3 more classes, so I want to thank you for accounting. I want to thank you for finance. And I want to thank you for organizational behavior. Because when you think about the work that I do right now, especially, moving into administration, I'm just so thankful, right, that I had those classes in my background. And so some of those concepts weren't foreign to me. So
yeah, and I think a way to think about it, because you're talking about be curious and ask questions. We had a previous guest a couple episodes ago, Casey Shaddix from University of Kentucky, and the phrase he used was a caring curiosity. And I was like, oh, that's exactly it. And if I think, like you're saying, like even if the student might not think they're questions that, well, why are they asking me questions? It all makes sense because you're trying to gather as much information from that student, kind of getting their narrative, their story out, and then learning more about them. And I guess kind of connected to that, and Alicia, you kind of referenced this a little bit about when meeting Melinda, but Melinda, what led you to Alicia as your advisor? Like, was Alicia your assigned advisor, someone that you then went to because you had questions about a major? And, when I think of myself as when I was a student, I had a hard time trusting other people and who they are. Like, what was it about Alicia that you gravitated towards for that trust? And then I guess, Alicia, what can you share to us about Melinda as a student, as an undergrad?
I really enjoy this question, Matt, because, now that I'm in the field, and I think about like advising models and structures and all this stuff, my mind goes to that immediately. But no, I had an assigned faculty advisor. And but what kept me coming back to Alicia was just her warmth and her energy in her office. We would come in and we would be able to talk about everything, for example, when I decided to pledge an organization and then who I was, dating, or, issues that were going on with my friend groups, and then her just being able to be like, okay, all right. Oh, so what's she going to do about that? Or I don't know if you should be doing all that, or, you know what I mean? It was just another voice in your ear about what you need to do to be your best self, And so I always, credit, those moments in her office with, what, I'm glad I stopped here and had this conversation so that I can make sure that I am representing my best self, right? That my mother had always raised me to be. And then it being confirmed also by another wonderful, amazing African-American woman who was like, no, you can do this, but this is how you're going to get this done. And then I became a peer advisor, which is probably, my first, introduction to, I just love curriculum and helping people figure out their classes. And so she was like, you should be a peer advisor, so somebody recognizing talent in you too, that energy also draws you in because people believe in you. They think that you're capable. And they want to provide opportunities for you to continue to grow and think differently about your experiences at college, which we all know that engagement is really important when you think about a sense of belonging. And so she really helped me feel like I belonged.
Wow. I'm just taking in all of that, Melinda. That's pretty powerful. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, and I certainly, you don't do those things for the compliments, and so to hear those things verbalized is it's really meaningful. So, like I said, when you called me, I'm really touched and moved that you had that experience interacting with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course, you are so welcome. And when I think about gratitude and giving people their flowers, for me, it was just so important that I find you to let you know that you made such a significant difference in my life, definitely, but in so many countless others. And so, wanting to make sure we take that's this moment, especially with all so much going on in the world, to let people know that you saw me, and I appreciate your guidance and support.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melinda. And I'm chuckling. I was chuckling when you said you had an assigned advisor and you didn't go to that person. And the funny thing is, there were a lot of students like that. Once that relationship was built, no one wanted to go to their assigned advisor. So that meant, there were a lot of students who, I remember those students who they were a credit or so short of graduation, and they would come freaking out.
Yes,
And
they
my
still do that.
advisor didn't tell me this, and they would go to their advisor to get their application. And so at the time I had a little bit of pull. So I could suggest to the director, well, hey, why don't we ask this faculty member to, design an independent study, or hey, you missed doing an extra internship credit. Let's help you find an internship. It wasn't getting out of a course, but it was being creative about how you might be able to help that student. In some cases I couldn't help, but I could help lessen the impact if they saw that there was a path to finishing, if not that semester, the next semester, over the summer. So yeah, there are a lot of those students at the door.
And I'm sure it was, you have your own caseload, and then you have, people that are other students that are finding you or hear from their friends. They're like, go to this advisor, and then they're probably going to be able to help you out. But now it's also then time wise, like there's only so much time in the day, and that's even, I guess, when we look at education or advising now, a lot has changed, but a lot has also stayed the same.
Same.
I guess for you, like, and I'm sure you've kind of, kept your, on the pulse of like how education might be nowadays. When you kind of look back with you as an advisor to now with higher ed, and we hear the term student success, what are your thoughts on hearing that term?
Yeah, I saw that question, and I'm still ruminating on it because I'm trying to understand what that means. So my last student-centric, student-centered kind of job was probably in 2016. So I haven't been as plugged into that piece. But what I did remember is seeing a lot of different services kind of merge, and it was all under the umbrella of student success. And so I don't, and so that was a time when I saw people who were still doing the work being worried that things would be too decentralized or too centralized and not as tailored for what the specific needs of the student would be. So that was kind of my last memory of it. I don't know if that's the same, but I know that there was concerns of how things were just being kind of put in a university setting, kind of in a conglomerate of a department or a division. Yeah, and I know that's based on capacity as universities get larger, and yeah. So I don't know if my thoughts on that are very concrete enough to include.
Well, no, I mean, no, thank you for sharing, because you're right. As we think about like student success, right? This new field, what does it mean? And then how is it organized, or how is it operationalized on particular campuses? There is no standardization, right, in terms of what services need to be pulled together. And it really, depends on how your organization structure is on your particular institution or campus. But when I think about student success broadly, when we think about its philosophy, you've hit on the nail on the head already in terms of how you were oriented to your work. How do I help this student now that they know that this requirement is missing? What are the things that we can do so that they don't have to spend an extra, semester of tuition? And so when we think about retention and persistence to the goal of completion, you were already oriented that way, right? Or when somebody asks you a question about, oh, what service do I need here, or what about that, you already knew who to pick up the phone and talk to. And so that's a lot of what we're seeing, is this combination of services coming together in order to create a more seamless process for students as they move through the institution. And so when I talk to people and they're like, well, we always did that, so now they're calling what I always did this. It's kind of funny, because it's kind of like, yes, people are finally recognizing that you had these decentralized services, but centralizing them in a way that you're supporting students and you're making the lift or burden a little lighter on everybody's shoulders to help a student get through. And then what does student success look like, in terms of student outcomes on particular campuses, is a lot of where our work now is, in terms of how do we support growth and development. And I always say, to make the rough places smooth is how I always try to frame it when I think about student success on campuses.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do remember that, Melinda. Having a student come in and say, I know this is not your job, but I'm having the worst time getting through financial aid, or I'm having the hardest time getting through to this professor. What should I do? So I do remember unpacking that, picking up a phone, walking over to an office with a student, doing those kind of things. And like you said, at that time, I felt it myself, but I know a lot of students felt like there were too few and far between advisors on campus that would do that, or had the capacity to do that, or even the motivation to do that, or making it easy for us to do that. So yeah, but I was lucky enough to have established relationships across different offices and disciplines that I felt comfortable doing that. So yeah.
But I think it's things like that, though, is probably what Melinda, probably what you got you to keep going back to Alicia as an advisor.
Absolutely. I mean, when she said, I know this isn't your job, but I just started laughing to myself inside, because I was like, absolutely. Because eventually you get to a point where you're like, even if she, even if Miss Marbury doesn't know, then she'll know who I need to talk to. Right. So, which is, when we think about our work, or the philosophy that drives academic advising, sometimes like, I don't know the answer, but I will find out, you know. And you never told me it was in the catalog, which is what I really, really super love about you. You were like, that's in the catalog. No, you never said that. It was, let me help. Let's walk through this. I know who you need to talk to. Because I don't know if you remember, everybody hated going to Founders Hall. Like, it was where the registrar's office, no, like anytime it was like, oh, you got to go to Founders, like, oh no, I don't want to go to the, oh my God, they're so mean. It was like, that visceral reaction to like going to Founders Hall. And then, when I didn't, to go get your financial aid refund check, right? So then it was like, oh no, you need to go over here in order to do that. I mean, nobody gives you those roadmaps, right? But to help students without the sense of judgment, or what are you doing, or do you think you're going to make it? I mean, now we call it the sense of belonging, right? Like, you belong here, and so after you stumble around a little bit and you feel like, okay, this is home, that's the goal. That's really the goal.
Yeah, and then even to Alicia, like with your career path and your journey, like, we talked in the beginning about what you currently do. You talked about being a filmmaker and producer. Now we've talked about your higher ed journey and being an advisor, and then you've also had roles as an administrator and instructor. But I guess what was the decision, and the path going from higher ed to your new roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was at some point, I had done advising right out of undergraduate school. I felt like, I didn't really give myself a chance to pursue what I wanted to pursue. I am giving all this great advice to other people, and I'm not following it for myself. So that was the motivation to kind of move to a different direction, use those skills in different ways. So that was the motivation for that.
No, I hear that. I do hear that. Practice what you preach. So absolutely. And just continue to excel and to do really well in all those areas. So kudos, right, for stepping out and taking that leap of faith that you've always told us to take. And so it's just wonderful to see where you are today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, one of the things that Matt asked me specifically, he was like, what do you think she would say about you as an undergraduate student? So let's ask the question, what do you remember about me as an undergraduate student? And remember, my mama might be listening to this.
So Melinda, as I said, when you called and asked, did I remember you? I just rolled my eyes and thinking, of course, Melinda, I remember you because, you were one of the bright spots of my day. When you would pop in, even if I had a ton of things to do, you allowed me to take a pause. And usually it was, you would have me laughing so much. Your sense of humor is just beyond. And so I always remember feeling happy seeing you. Oh. And but also seeing you happy, but also knowing how you really wanted to succeed, and you were not getting what you needed, and I wanted to help. But your sense of humor, your energy, your laugh, your smile, that was what I remember and still see from that time with you. And if I don't remember, I'm still trying to remember. I'm going to bring up a mutual friend of ours. I don't remember if Bashan brought you or you brought Bashan. It felt like you two were a package deal.
We were, and I don't remember either, because you're right. We would always come see you together, and we just had to go see our boo and bring some sunshine into your office.
Now, we should say, Bashan, I've lost track. Is he a director of admissions or?
He's director of recruitment. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So
he was another one of those students who, came in and look at how successful he is. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we always, when we get together, especially, BC alumni weekend is coming up next weekend. And so, he was like, did you get your ticket? Are you going to go? And I'm like, ugh, but I probably will get my ticket and go. And just, it's always really good to kind of run into, your old, schoolmates and talk and laugh about the times on that campus, from, because we were both Greek. So, fall block, or what was it like hanging out in the commons? And, I always credit a lot of the way that I see the world in terms of growth and perspective. VCU was such a highly diverse campus, in terms of not just, race or ethnicity, but, adult learners being in my classroom to people retooling themselves. And so I just always appreciated having that broad experience about what life looks like, at my university, and not this idea that it's it's all 18 to 21-year-olds kind of, moving through, but then also having the on-campus lived experience and then living off. And And that came with parking tickets and running around and trying to move your car. And so you were just really supportive with that. But there's this one pivotal moment that I know that I had with you that I just think was so powerful that I just want to honor you. And I was struggling with my internship experience, and I came to you and I was just in tears, and you went into action immediately and picked up that phone and helped me navigate that situation. And I tell everybody that my advisor saved my life because you did, and helped me see that I should finish and continue to navigate and move forward. And then even when I finished school, you still helped me with my master's degree because I was just like, well, what is this? And you were like, you got to take GREs, girl, and you got to do this and you got to do that. And so for me, it's just the fact that you just kept giving. And I do believe that, I dedicated my dissertation to you because I knew that I wouldn't have gotten to the level of even getting a doctorate if I didn't think I could have made it through my undergraduate experience. And for you to offer your energy even beyond when I wasn't one of your students in terms of getting into my master's program, I just want to thank you and acknowledge how powerful you've been in my life. And I'm just so glad to be sitting here with Matt and having this interview with you, because that's exactly why I'm in academic advising today, is because you felt like my life mattered. And so I try to take that same energy into all my experiences with my students and then my staff and my institution overall, because I know what it means for somebody to make a difference in your life, and every student should have that. So I just want to thank you.
You're going to have me on YouTube crying?
I know. I got my tissues right over here because I was like, I know I'm going to talk about this, and I just needed to know. And of course, I'm sure my mama was very excited about that, because I'm sure if I called her to tell her that I wasn't going to finish school, she would have been like, no, ma'am. And so, it was just wonderful. And Matt, I don't know if I shared this, but, as after Alicia left the School of Mass Comm, they hired me to come into her position right after that. And let me tell you how many people came in and looking for Miss Aroche. They were just like, you're not Miss Aroche. You're not. Where's Alicia? And I was like, no, I'm new, but I'm here to help you too. And they were like, oh no, I got to go find her. And it was so wonderful though, to be in her chair right after her. Right. And I think about what that meant, in terms of being as important as she was to me, trying to make sure that I am that for other students. And so, but it was just funny. The first couple of months, people would come in and be like, oh.
But for those students, you had to prove yourself, because Elise had already set the bar so high, they had an expectation. Yes. And even though you being new, it's like, you need to have all the right answers.
I'm sorry, Linda. I'm sorry. I know how difficult that is. I've been in that situation in other spaces. And I remember you even reaching out just for advice. How am I supposed to navigate the student, not just the students, but the faculty?
Oh, yes.
Conversation.
Yes, navigating faculty. Yes, you were very helpful in that regard. It was my, when you think about kind of the work you do as a staff member and then working with faculty and understanding faculty politics and dynamics. Yes, you talk about a growing up moment. Because, you see faculty one way and then you work with them and you may see them in other lenses. And so just the politics of departmental politics. Wow. Yes, that was, you were like, oh yeah. So let me, so yeah, what's going on? I mean, it was one of those moments where you're just like, your eyes are like slammed wide open. Right. And then like the relationship building with other partners on campus, like, needing to know who's in the registrar's office and financial aid, and, if somebody needs tutoring services, and you know, a lot of our students struggle with that grammar and typing test. And so how do you support somebody who can't keep persisting because they can't get into this one class? And so those conversations around curriculum, it was huge. It was huge. And when I think about that experience and then moving into student affairs, because eventually I did go into student activities from that, the idea of always being concerned about a student's academic progress, their experiences, how are you connecting with faculty, are you going to class? I mean, that was my heart when I went into student affairs, you know. So even in res life, my RAs, I was like, okay, let's talk about, you know, how are you coming along with your school and classes, and do you know about this curriculum thing? And they're like, no, my advisor didn't tell me. And I was like, oh, well, then you need to make sure you're doing this, and you have to apply for graduation. Like, it was, they were just kind of like, okay, like, are you in student affairs or your academic affairs? But my heart just became blended in that way, because you can't do this work without thinking about where the whole student sits. And and so it just ignited my passion to make sure that those elements always existed in every element of my work. So whether I was in res life or working at J. Sargent Reynolds Community College, or, you know, those two pieces about engagement, a sense of belonging, and persistence with your academics, and majors and careers aren't linear, were really the beginning of my advising philosophy. If I was to think about it that way. I need to meet your kids and be like, your mom's amazing.
Oh, well, I need to do the same for you and yours. Even though you have yours is already in college.
Yes, I'm a college student.
Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
yes. And you know what, Matt? Alicia looks the exact same way. She just is her. I'm telling you, it's crazy. I'm like, look, I'm like, this is my advisor, y'all. She looks amazing. She's beautiful. Like, I mean, everybody was like, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. And I was just like, oh my God. But
Oh, that makes me
so,
feel good because I just had a birthday yesterday. So
oh, happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
well, I
Oh,
don't even want to think about how long ago that was.
Right. Oh my goodness.
a different lifetime, but it also can feel like it was just yesterday too.
Oh, definitely. I said to Melinda, you know, as my path has gone, you know, so many different directions, but that work and that time, you know, has to be the most, I would say, filmmaking and the storytelling work, absolutely. But that period has been the most gratifying for me because, you know, Melinda, you know, found me, but I've had, and I don't know if it's a pandemic or what, but I've had actually quite a few students in the last, former students in the last 2 years find me and just say to me, you know, I just want to tell you what a difference you made in my life. And thinking, wow, this just out of the blue, you know, had a student from California. She had just had a baby and was at an ad agency and just wanted to let me know. And you know, quite a few students and former students. And then I have former students who I count as friends, like Melinda. You know, we haven't been in touch, but we remained friends. And so it was definitely an amazing experience for me too.
Well, some of some of your best friends or good friends are the ones that you don't see for years, and then you could pick up the phone, and then it's almost like you just continue on where you left off, and it seems like this is one of those.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. That's a good point, Matt.
Yeah, and then even with this, like in terms of like with Melinda's story, with your story, Alicia, like Melinda is the executive director of a global advising organization of NACADA, and to think, you know, your impact on her in a way led to, you know, this path of being the NACADA executive director and still being in higher ed and in advising, and to think where would Melinda's path have gone had, let's say, she had stayed with her assigned advisor, or didn't meet with you, or didn't come back after graduation to ask you about grad school and potentially doing higher education later. So, Melinda, I'll leave the last minute or two to you if you want anything you want to say before we end this interview.
I mean, Matt, you brought that together so beautifully. I mean, absolutely. I've said earlier that I credited my relationship with her in terms of sparking this passion that I had about helping others, especially in higher education settings. And when I think about what made the difference for me as a student and really trying to live what Alicia had put into us, into all my roles in terms of how I was supporting students, it's just for me, I feel like it's just a powerful tribute to others. When you say that you value and you appreciate and you care about how somebody has poured into you, it's turning around and honoring them by becoming that for somebody else. And so I just think that it's a really great point that you made about how, what would have happened, right, if I hadn't went to her office that day, and found that I could, still make it through school, and then realizing that she still cared about me, and I was, I remember that moment when I was like, I could go to get a master's degree in higher education and stay at the university, and she was like, oh yeah, that's what my degree is in. And I was just like, oh my God, like, I'm an academic advisor. You can also do academic advising. This is what it looks like. And I mean, like, she was the one that introduced all that to me. I was just like, she's an amazing person that I keep talking to in my department, right? But you never think about that being a potential career path or profession. And so coming into this space and just wanting to make sure that all students have the opportunity to connect with those who care deeply about their success, holistically, right? Not just making sure that you register, but making sure that you are moving in the direction and becoming the best self that you are supposed to be in this world. That is what fuels my passion. And to just be able to share that with her today, especially as we go into Global Advising Week, as we're celebrating and acknowledging and by giving gratitude and celebrating our field and our profession, is I have no words except for the fact that I feel very blessed and honored to be in this situation, and to be in this role for NACADA, and to be able to represent our association proudly, because I know firsthand how critical this work is to the success of our students.
Yeah, and I know I said the last word for you, Melinda, but actually based off that, Alicia, anything you wanted to add to finish this interview?
Yeah, I'm just still processing that. This has been such a highlight, to hear from you a few weeks ago, Melinda, and just I'm so proud of you. I am so proud of you. Just where you have come from and what you're doing now, and I know you're making such an impact, and will continue to do that. And just to hear you say that I was a small part of that, I'm just humbled. So I may need to ask you for a job one day.
Oh,
So thank you for creating this, inviting me to this conversation. Yeah. And I can't wait to share it with my kids. I have a college bound student in a couple years, so I'm going to let her listen and watch this, and I'll say I know she will not be surprised at some of these things, because I hear some of that from her, as a daughter and a mom, and yeah, so I don't see that changing. So I told her, if I'm going to be your academic advisor if you don't have a good one, so don't worry.
Exactly. I love it. It's like riding a bike. You'll crack open that catalog, look at those gen eds, and get to work.
I'll be on the phone. I will be one of those helicopter parents that they used. I don't know if that's the term still being used, but
yes, it is. It is. Like you like.
I may turn into one of those. I don't know.
Oh wow, that's great. You know, and thank you again, Matt, for being able to provide such a platform for us to be able to share our narratives and our story today.
Oh, it's been great hearing you both reminisce about the past and the impacts that both of you have had on one another. So I can't wait to get this edited and posted for Global Advising Week. So Alicia, Melinda, thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Well,